If you guys haven't got the book yet, please get this book. It's actually really good. Tim Keller, he's a pastor of a church in like New York. It's actually pretty crazy because it's like a giant church in like a really kind of liberal, kind of an unchurched kind of city. So I think he's really relevant. He has some really deep insights. So tonight's will be from chapter 3, Idolatry. And I was actually slated to share a missions update today, and I'm going to actually work that into my lesson instead of doing part of the announcements. And like always, I like to draw. So let me tell you a story. There was once a man. His name is Dave Pat. That is me.
Where's the muscles?
Too skinny.
Okay, there are muscles.
Okay. You guys put the white.
Looks like tumors.
Muscles. Those aren't clothes, those are muscles.
Nice shorts.
So, I'm armored in muscles. That is really stupid. Okay, no, I'm just a stick figure. So now I'm going to share with you a little bit about our Shanghai ministry and how that's been going. To give a little bit of history on this, because without the history, you don't understand just where we come from. Back in 2005, 2006 is when we first started doing Shanghai ministry. And those first trips was just me by myself going there. And if you guys don't know, on Sundays I go to Harvest Church. And Harvest, at one point, was mainly a college church. So part of what we originally wanted to do in Shanghai was to build up a college ministry, because that's what we knew really well. When we got to Shanghai, I started talking to the pastor there. We found out Shanghai has 15 universities. All right, just in the city of Shanghai alone, 15 universities. These are like SDSU, UCSD size universities, right? Like just a couple thousand people. And what we realized is that there were almost no fellowships for college students, right? Like there's camps who stayed there, but they were like maybe 5 people big, you know. And there weren't like there's basically people going there for maybe a few weeks at a time, but not anything really established. Definitely nothing with the local church. So one of the things we wanted to do there was to work with the local church so that when people get plugged into a fellowship, they don't just, you know, fall away after college and do their own thing, but they get plugged back into the community of Shanghai. Because a lot of them come from the countryside to Shanghai to go to school, to work, and then they stay there. You know, like a lot of you, most of you are not from San Diego, right? Who's actually from San Diego here? Okay. It's actually a lot higher than ours. Okay. But the majority of you are not from San Diego. So you guys don't understand that. You come to a city for college, you come for work, you kind of stay there. So one of the things we wanted to do, this is the church. Just get these little people, you know, it's not bigger than them, right, into the church. And there's a lot of them, okay? What we realized what we needed to do that though, is we had to have staff who were specifically dedicated to that ministry. If you think about your pastoral staff here, right? Imagine if Pastor Jimmy didn't do his job, like he did not exist, right? I think who served or served on core here? Mindy, you do work core at all? No. Kind of. Okay. For those of you who worked at the college ministry, you guys know the pastor helps you a lot, right? In terms of direction, vision, and just planning stuff like that. And we realized you can't just put that on a senior pastor. So a few years ago, one of our buddies, Daniel, who I'm talking about later today, he started as our Chinese counterpart for the college ministry. And so we needed an American counterpart because we found out the best way to reach college students in China is English teaching. So we were kind of praying for like an American counterpart. I thought it was going to be me. All right, and then I met a girl named Carmen, and then that didn't happen. Now I'm in America for a while. We needed an English counterpart. And then, magically, a girl here, her name is Chio. You guys know who she is. Chio's from this church. Which was fine here. It's like I'm like Daniel's dad. Daniel actually wasn't around. When I first started going to Shanghai, he wasn't around. He actually is from the province. He's kind of like, I want to say a relatively new believer. So I've been saved, I want to say maybe 5 years, somewhere around that range. But he's actually from one of the provinces, and he came to Shanghai for work. Daniel started maybe about 2 years ago, and Chio, this is her first year starting. One of the exciting things about Chio starting is that for the first time, we finally have an American counterpart for Daniel. So now what Chio has been doing this year in Shanghai, she's been working with Daniel to do the college ministry. Basically, imagine what you guys do on college campuses, right? You hold small groups, you have like outings, hang out, like car rally, progressive dinner, you guys name what college events you guys do. And they basically try to do that in Shanghai. And so I wanted to share with you guys a story of like, what is the fruit of college ministry? All right, so I realized I don't give you actual names, you'll never remember any of this. I went to Shanghai this summer, and we started up an entirely new ministry at a university called Songjiang. Songjiang is like an hour out of Shanghai. I've actually never been there until like this year. It's like in the boonies. you can tell it's in the boonies because in Shanghai they have all the VW cars. Anyone a fan of VW? No? No VW fans? Okay. But in Shanghai they have all the versions of the Passat, right? And it's basically all the Passat versions are like taxi cars. All the new versions. Right? And so like you see like these like nice shiny like 6-cylinder engine cars, some are like minivans now. And you go to Songjiang and it's like starts from the 1970s or 80s. It's like some broken down cabs at like half the price. So Songjiang is like way in the boonies of Shanghai. But we started ministry in Shanghai. We started meeting with this new group, right? And for some reason in this university, the only people who can get to come to our English teaching were girls, all right? So it's like 15 girls of like 18 to 21 years old. And so Chio and Daniel started meeting up with these girls, started doing Bible studies, right? And so during the summer, I had participated with them. I remember during one of our kind of group meetups, I was just talking to them, finding out what they were like, what their hopes and dreams were, right? So I remember talking to this one girl. Her name is Apple, right? If you guys know Chinese names, they just arbitrarily choose names. Right? So this girl name is Apple. And so we were just talking about like, why you're in college. Like my intent was to find out like what do you want to do after college, right? So I guess I phrased it like, what do you want to be, right? And then she says, I do not want to be a xiaosan, right? I'm like, what the heck is that, right? And apparently she told me this term xiaosan means like, so in Shanghai there's a lot of adultery, there's a lot of cheating, okay? And so there's a specific word for like the mistress, which is like xiaosan. So it's like a husband works at like a company, right? And he has like a respectable wife that like, his family approves of and all that stuff, but he has like a mistress on the side, right? And that mistress is like the one he like gives all these like, Louis Vuitton bags to, like Cartier watches, whatever. And so apparently she told me that like, the reason why Shanghai has so many luxury brands is because of the xiaosans. Right? Because like, there are so many mistresses, right? There's like a huge market for like these like luxury items that like cheating husbands buy. True story. Ask your Shanghai friends, okay? This is true story. I heard this from a Shanghai news college today. And so she was telling me that, right? I'm like, your goal in life is to not be a mistress, right? But it got me thinking because what she was basically saying is that what she really wanted in life was a relationship. What she really wanted in life was to be loved, right? And she didn't want to be cheated on. She wanted to be someone who was faithful to her. And it was interesting. It was interesting that came up in conversations. I was just talking about careers and stuff. But I remember from that conversation, I kind of delved a little deeper. I'm like, what does love look like for you in a marriage? What is love in general, right? Because China's a communist country. So what do you teach in communism when there's atheism? You just basically teach like, the only morality is what we make as human beings. We're kind of like evolutionary products just from monkeys and stuff like that, right? So I was asking her like, if love is just something we choose to do, then you never have a guarantee that a person will be faithful to you, right? Because if we fundamentally believe that human beings are flawed in some way or another, and if our love's flawed in that way too, then you have basically no guarantee someone's going to be faithful to you, right? And like I remember talking to her about this, and she's like, "Man, that's like a really depressing outlook on life, And then this is how you share the gospel, right? So I was like, let me tell you what I believe, right? Because I shared about my marriage because they thought it was super interesting that I was married. They would want to know how I got together and stuff like that. But I was just sharing with her like, I think love has to start with God. Because if love doesn't start with God, then the foundation you're starting from is going to be a flawed foundation, right? It's a foundation that can't stand. It's a foundation that depends on fickle human nature or evolutionary changes or whatever, right? So I was telling her, look, love has to start with God. And if it starts with God, and if the creation was made in love, right, and exists by the love of God, And if God is the reason for my marriage, what carries my marriage on is not my ability to love my wife, but it's God's love for my wife through me. And if you're a girl, you're like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. It's like so poetic and beautiful. Right? And you gotta understand, 86% of this world's Muslims, Hindus, people of other religions have never met another Christian. 86%. The great majority of people who are not Christians have never met a Christian. So I'm sure this is the first time she's ever heard this. And she looked at me and she's like, wow. Right? Because I don't know if I convinced her or whatever, right? But I knew for the first time, that's the first time she's ever heard that. Right? That if love itself does not start from God, we have no foundation. Amazingly now, Chio, she's been coming out to all the Bible studies that Chio's been having. Right? And like all the pictures Chio posts on Facebook. You know, she's in those Bible studies and stuff. That's what we're trying to do in Shanghai. That's one of the amazing, exciting things, all right, that she's been doing. I have her prayer request out for you guys today. I encourage you guys to join her mailing list. Get to know more about what she's doing. Ask about her name's Apple. This is your number. All right, and then we will go into this study, and I will show you how that all ties together. Okay, so Gospel in Life. Tonight we're talking about idolatry. So let's start off with this. What idolatry is and is not. Idolatry is the worship of anything but Jesus Christ. And idolatry is not always blatantly pagan. Okay? I'm just going to say this just to set this up. Idolatry. Old Testament, what does it look like? Old Testament, or in a lot of pagan cultures around the world, it looks like a little statue you make, right? Some of you guys won't argue with me on this, but I'm telling you it's an idol. You know those cat Chinese statues that have the paw thing? That's an idol, okay? I had a Christian friend like, dude, that's so cool. I'm like, it's not cool. What do you think was cool? It's an idol. Any kind of like Chinese pagoda thing that you always see in the restaurants, like those gold ones, even if they're not a shape, a form of an animal, that's still an idol. All right? It represents an idea or an ideal that is not of God. That's idolatry in its most blatant form. Okay? But I think what is dangerous for us today, because I don't think you're going to go out and buy some cat with a paw or some pagoda thing. What I think we're at risk here in the American church are a couple of these things. These are not real words I made them up. I just added the word idolatry. Bibleolatry. There are a lot of churches in America. A lot. Alright? The Trinity is God the Father, the Son, and the Bible. That's the Trinity. Because they put so much emphasis on the Bible that they completely blot out the fact that Jesus calls us to love, Jesus calls us to evangelize, Jesus calls us to be community, Jesus calls us to worship, right? And they're pretty much like, is that in the Bible? If that's in the Bible, then I'm not going to do it. Right? Dancing in the Bible, then I'm not going to dance. It's like, are drums in the Bible? Well, if not, then you can't have drums in church, okay? Bibleolatry. These are other things. Church idolatry. It's not a real word, okay? Don't make fun of me. I'm just trying to make a point. I think, especially for our demographic, it is really easy to make the church God. Alright? It's really easy to make the church God. I'll give you an example of that. Alright, this is my own life, right? So you guys know I work in missions now, right? I do a lot of mobilization. So what that means is I work with a lot of pastors to encourage their churches to go on missions. I talk to a lot of congregations to encourage them to think about how they like to be more missions-minded. When you work with people, it's really frustrating. Okay, because everyone is a little unique in their own little way, right? Laughing at me. Everyone's unique in their own little way. And so it's really easy to get frustrated, and it's really easy to turn that frustration of people into frustration of God. It's really easy to turn your ministry into God, right? Whereas like, well, if my ministry doesn't treat me well, then God isn't treating me well, right? Or I'm worshiping God when I'm doing well in my ministry. So where someone's like, well, how are you doing with God right now? I'm like, well, look, I try to mobilize for a conference, and it's huge. That's how I'm doing with God. Like, people love the stuff I do. Or I was like, how are you doing with God? Well, you know, I shared the gospel with like 20 people today, and they all came to Christ. That's how I'm doing with God. That's really easy. That's a really easy trap to fall into. God is not ministry. Alright? God is not ministry. This was a weird one. Fellowshipology. I couldn't even figure out how to spell this one. It looks like poultry. There's also, I think there's also a danger in the church today to turn the love of hanging out with God's people into God himself. Right? Where everything becomes like, well, how are you doing with God? Well, I go to church all the time, you know? Like, I hang out with people. And I'm being spiritual because, you know, I'm hanging out with people on Wednesday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday. So I must be walking well with God. There's a huge danger in that. Okay, guys, there's a huge, huge danger in that. I'm gonna move on this. I'm gonna counteract that real quick with this. Now, 3 myths about idolatry. Well, at the same time, enjoyment of something secular is not always idolatry, all right? Some people are like, well, you enjoy that? You enjoy watching Lost? You're an idolater, right? Because Lost is super evil. All right, it's like, you enjoy ice cream? Well, you're not an idolater because you can't have fun. Because fun is bad. All right. Enjoyment of something secular is not always idolatry. That's a myth. It's a myth to think that every time you're having fun with something secular, that it's like, oh my gosh, you're being led astray from God. At the same time, you cannot believe that worship of idols always looks the same. You can't just say like, well, that person in India is bowing down to like this elephant statue thing. That's idolatry. And so in America, that must also look the same. It's not true, right? In everyone's life, even in this church, it looks different. Right? So there needs to be a little bit of discernment, I think, when we look for idolatry in our life. Another myth. I can always tell if my heart is being led astray. This is why we have small groups. Okay? You cannot tell if your heart is being led astray. It's not easy to tell if idolatry is in your life. One of the things I'm always wary of as a young person in ministry, right, is not having accountability. I feel like for people our age who have a lot of good ideas or like are really excited about things, it's really easy to fly solo on things, right? Because like we have these ideas that no one else is on board with yet, and we just want to do them ourselves. The problem with flying solo is that you have no accountability. And the reason why we were made into community is because the Holy Spirit works in other people to help us convict us of sin. To be honest with you, I don't know in your lives if someone has ever come up to you and like, you know, like, hey, can I sit down with you and talk to you about something serious? Right? And they like talk about sin in your life. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. Let me tell you, that's actually a good thing. Right? That is a good thing. If someone comes down, sits down with you and says, hey, this is what I'm concerned about in your life. Right? Don't take that as just like, oh my gosh, someone like hates me, he's just a jerk. Okay? Take that as the grace of God working in your life, giving you a chance to come back to God. Because the wages of sin is death. Right? There's actually a funny story with that. I remember when I was a freshman, like 2 of the other freshmen go in our class, like, hey David, could we sit down and have lunch with you? I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? Right? And it was like a Monday, and like it was lunch on Wednesday. Like for like 2 days, I was like going through my life, my schedule, like, what did I do that could have been so bad? Right? And then it actually wasn't anything. They just wanted to hang out. But let me encourage you guys, all right? You cannot always tell if your heart's being led astray by yourself. Welcome fellowship into your life. And why are we talking about this tonight? Because it stops the ministry of the church. It stifles going, giving, and experiencing the goodness of God. It took me a lot of work to think of 3 Ds. It stifles going, giving, and experiencing the goodness of God. Let me break that down. Why is idolatry worth bringing up? The American church is idolatrous when the things that are meant for God go to something else. Here's an example. How many people usually do we have in a church for one pastor? You guys know this number? For each pastor on staff in a church, how many people in the congregation are usually present for that one pastor? Like how many people usually in the congregation does it take to support one pastor in America? You guys have a guess. So just throw out some numbers now. 200, I hear 55. Give one more guess. It's usually about 110, around 100. Okay. Now, in Africa, they have a rule called the rule of 10. All right, a lot of church planners have this rule. So basically, 10 families giving 10% of their income can support a pastor living at the same level. Right? Does that make sense? So if say you guys are poor, you guys make 10,000, 10,000 euros a year. All right? And And so you all give 1,000, which is 1% or 10% of your income. Add those 10% up, it's 100%. Support a pastor living at the same level as you. And a lot of times that works in Africa. Or a lot of times it works in China too. All you need is about 10 people to support a pastor. In America, it takes 110 people. You know why? Because in America, our giving is like 3%. And that's who we actually are probably committed as members of the church. We have a lot of people who don't commit as members to the church, so they don't give to the church. So in America, instead of giving to the church, what do? We buy bigger houses. How do I know that? Because we have a recession right now, because people bought really big houses they couldn't afford. In America, instead of giving to the church, what do? We also buy boats. It's like a new thing now, buy boats. I'm not saying buying big houses and buying boats is bad. What I am saying is, if the church is focused on the things of the world, right, it's not going to be able to give to the ministry of the church. That's the danger of idolatry. The things that were intended for God are being given to something else. If you read the Old Testament, if you read how God accuses the Israelites, right, one of the accusations he makes against them is that bring the tithe into the house of God. Right? One of the things you see in the Israelites' history is that when they start prospering, they don't give back to God. They just start collecting bigger and bigger like storehouses and make bigger barns for themselves. One of my friends in university told me the story. I think it's hilarious. It's like, one time we were sitting at dinner, he's like, David, let me tell you a story from the Bible. There was a man in the Bible, and he made a lot of money, and he said, I'll make barns for my money. And you know what happened? God killed him. So he has another parable. But it's true, right? And like, our human tendency is like, the more money we get, the more we store for ourselves, unless we give to God. Okay, so that's one of the dangers. Instead of giving to God, we give to ourselves. It stifles going. Why does idolatry stifle going? I'm going to show you guys a story in a second about my friend Daniel. If your heart's not set on God, and your heart's set on things in the world, it's going to be hard to go on missions. It's going to be hard to go to the inner cities and teach. It's going to be hard to go to the careers that are just difficult, right? But that God's calling you, but are difficult. I feel like I have a lot of friends. I'm 26, right? So I feel like I've seen a lot of my friends who are in college and like have these great ideas for like, I'm going to do ministry. I'm like, do all these awesome things for God. And they come out and they work for Facebook. Or they work for MySpace. MySpace is not even that cool. Yeah. What happened? It's really easy, I think, to fall into that trap because sometimes our priorities are more about security. Sometimes our priorities are more about how can I provide for my family. As if, like, you know, and not even married, right? There's like single. There's like, how do I provide for a family I don't even have yet, right? Because their focus is just on, you know, what's the next 2 years instead of the kingdom of God. It's a dangerous trap to fall into. I also put experiencing the goodness of God. The biggest danger of idolatry is that you can't see how good God is and how worthless idols are. In one of the cities we work with outside of Shanghai a couple hours, it's called Gaoyou. And in Gaoyou, no joke, okay, these are like, I see some of the shops that are just straight up run down, right? It's like, the shops that just sell rice, right? So it's like just hecka dirty, but they're just like bags and bags of rice everywhere. And then like, and this guy's like totally, he's a farmer, you can tell, right? He's like not even wearing a shirt, he just has like ripped up pants and he had like a straw on him now. He's like, want my rice? Right? And this guy's like, you know he's not like the richest guy in the world, but he has like this golden pagoda thing in his shop. I know he doesn't make that much money, right? I know he has probably his big family he's trying to provide for, but he spent enough of his money just to buy this golden pagoda thing because he believes it brings him good luck. And every single shop on that block has the same golden pagoda thing. They invest in this pagan symbol because if they think that it can bring them happiness and joy and goodness and luck. What it's actually doing is that it makes them think that the God of this universe is encased in the pagoda. Right? It misdirects their worship. Because if they knew the true God, you think they would have a pagoda and trust in it? They wouldn't. They would actually trust the true God that can actually provide for them and care for them. Right? But what idolatry does is that it misdirects that trust. And so they're not actually experiencing the goodness of God. They're trying to trust in this pagoda that doesn't actually give them anything. That's one of the dangers of idolatry in your life. Right? We don't cast down idols because it's like, oh my gosh, that's a Christian thing to do. We cast down idols because it's good for us. Because there's things that block us from knowing who God is. So, let's share this out. The story about my friend Daniel who works at Chia. Daniel's a really interesting guy. He's from one of the small provinces, so his English is like really bad. Most of the Chinese people now who go to college, if you go to a good college, you have to speak English. There's an English entrance exam. So you know what SATs have English? They have English on their SATs too. it's kind of crazy. But Daniel, he went to a little bit lower, I think a technical school, but he's an engineer by trade. So before he was Christian, Daniel worked for like one of these like big electrical engineering firms. He made like, he did like these huge projects. I think he told me like he was making the equivalent of what like 6 figures in China. Okay, so he was like making bank, and his life was pretty interesting. Like he was telling me like he was in charge of these large projects, and this one time they did this project, and then the project kind of failed because they didn't meet government regulations, and he had to sit down with the owner, the client, like who's the owner, and they sat down. And he's like, man, I'm sorry, it's gonna cost you like 2 million RMB because like we screwed up, right? And then they had a couple drinks, they're karaokeing, and the guy was like, forget about it, I'll just sign a waiver, and we're good. And so like Daniel's life was just really interesting, doing these big projects and like doing engineering and stuff. And then one day he found Christ, right? He started going to the house church. He started getting more involved in the church. And then when we had this call to, hey, who wants to do college ministry, right? Pastor Aaron of the house church actually made a call. He said, we want to do college ministry. I want volunteers, right? Who wants to basically give up their careers and come on board with the church? And it's not like America, right? Like, you guys know how much Pastor Stephen makes. It's like middle class. In China, you go into the lower class, right? Like, ministry in China is the equivalent of making like $4 an hour. Like, it kind of sucks. I'm trying to change that because it kind of sucks, right? And Daniel pretty much volunteered. He's like, that's fine. I'll make $4 an hour, right? When we visited him this summer, and this is kind of, I still don't understand why he does this, because I think we give him enough money to get his own apartment. But, so he has an apartment, but he has like an IE, right? It's a maid. But his maid is like 50, right? And she's a live-in maid. But he has 1 bedroom, right? And so he feels bad about, having to sleep on the couch. So he sleeps on the couch, and he gives her the bedroom, right? So we go to his place, and his IE is sleeping in the 1 bedroom, and he has a couch which she sleeps on, right? And I'm like, what is going on? But anyways, he's an interesting guy, because I asked him, like, are you happy with your job right now? Like, are you happy with, like, the salary you have and stuff like that? He's like, I've actually never been happier. It excites me to see that. Because he's pretty much our age, right? He's in like late 20s. It excites me to see a person who can take a huge step down in living, right? And like, I don't even know why he got an IE in the first place, but he's happy to sleep on the couch. Like, he feels like that is a calling from God for him to sleep on the couch, right? Because the joy he gets in seeing people come to Christ, right? And seeing people like Apple, that's a story to share with you, right? Hearing about God's love for the first time. I think for Daniel, what were his idols? I mean, from the countryside, so he probably had some like family idol stuff, right? But before what was coming from God, it was just like this idea that I have to be an engineer, I have to make this good money and then buy a house and then get married and da-da-da, right? But even in China, in that culture that's so driven to like success, he saw the goodness of God and he gave that up. And he gave that up and said, God, I can take like a lower salary and sleep on the couch if it means experiencing God's goodness. I think that's what we're trying to do today. We're gonna play a video from Tim Keller. He's gonna go through the Bible stuff, right? I just wanted to set this up. The reason why we talk about idolatry in the church, and the reason why we have accountability for it, is because we want to make sure we experience the goodness of God. We're not hindered from